In 1857, deep in the frozen North Pole, an exploration ship is trapped fast in solid ice. Captain Anderson orders his exhausted crew to start breaking the ice surrounding the vessel, hoping the pressure might loosen its grip and allow the ship to move. After hours of backbreaking labor, the ship's doctor alerts Anderson to something strange, flickers of fire burning far off in the distance. Concerned, Anderson takes several men and ventures out onto the ice to investigate. What they discover is horrifying, blood smeared across the frozen ground. Following the trail, they find a badly injured man named Victor, barely clinging to life. As they attempt to help him, a deafening, unnatural roar echoes across the ice. Panic erupts. The crew rushes Victor back to the ship and arms themselves. Moments later, an enormous, terrifying creature emerges from the darkness and advances toward them. The men open fire, but their bullets have no effect. The monster reaches the ship and begins slaughtering crew members with terrifying strength, overwhelming them with ease. The creature climbs aboard and demands that Victor be handed over. When the crew refuses, it attacks again, defeating them one by one. Desperate, Captain Anderson grabs a shotgun and fires, finally knocking the creature off the ship. Though wounded, it still lives. The crew quickly raises the ladder to prevent it from climbing back aboard. Enraged, the creature begins pushing the ship itself, causing it to tilt dangerously. Anderson fires again, this time aiming at the ice beneath the monster's feet. The ice shatters, and the creature plunges into the freezing ocean below. Once the danger passes, the ship's doctor treats Victor's wounds. Victor warns them that the creature cannot be killed and will return, slaughtering anyone who stands in its way. He then confesses the truth. He is the one who created it. When the creature comes back, Victor insists Anderson must hand him over. With that, Victor begins recounting how everything began. Victor is the son of a famous surgeon named Leopold, a man who married Victor's mother solely for her wealth. Though rarely home, Leopold is cruel and controlling when present, so much so that he dictates even when his wife may eat. His parents argue constantly over money and over Victor himself, leaving the boy terrified. After each confrontation, Victor comforts his sobbing mother and slowly realizes his father despises them both. Leopold trains Victor in medicine from a young age, testing him relentlessly. Any wrong answer is punished with violence. One tragic day, Victor's mother goes into labor and begins bleeding severely. Leopold intervenes, successfully delivering the baby, a healthy boy named William, but Victor's mother dies in the process. With her gone, Victor feels completely alone. As time passes, Leopold devotes all his attention to William, while Victor is neglected and ignored. This drives Victor to question how his mother could have died under the care of the greatest surgeon in the country. Eventually, he confronts his father, accusing him of sacrificing her to gain the son he truly wanted. Leopold coldly responds that death cannot be defeated. From that moment on, Victor vows to master both life and death themselves. That night, he dreams of a dark, fiery angel, an image that fuels his obsession and pushes him to become a greater surgeon than his father ever was. Back in the present, the creature breaks through the ice once more, resurfacing and beginning its hunt for the ship. Victor continues his story. After Leopold's death, William is sent to live with relatives in Vienna, while Victor travels across London and Edinburgh, spending years devoted entirely to expanding his medical knowledge. In 1855, at the Royal College of Medicine, Victor presents a radical theory that death can be reversed. He unveils a body assembled from multiple corpses, revealing that the arm belongs to a carpenter while the rest came from a shopkeeper. When Victor activates his device using electricity, the body moves, stunning the audience. A professor dismisses the demonstration as a cheap spectacle, claiming the motion is nothing more than electrical stimulation. To prove otherwise, Victor throws a ball. The body catches it instantly, demonstrating conscious coordination. The hall erupts in outrage. The professors declare the experiment blasphemous, insisting that only God has the right to give life. Amid the chaos, a man named Henrik observes silently. After Victor disconnects the body and leaves, Henrik follows him outside. He explains that William sent him and that William will soon arrive with his fiancée, who also happens to be Henrik's niece. Henrik praises Victor's work, noting its brilliance but also pointing out flaws caused by Victor's excitement. Henrik urges Victor to remain in Edinburgh for 3 more days, promising to show him something extraordinary. 3 days later, Victor visits Henrik's residence, bringing his research with him. Henrik reveals his past as a military surgeon and unveils a preserved human nervous system displayed on a wooden slab like a work of art. They discuss how the human body stores and transfers energy, sparking new ideas for Victor's experiments. Henrik offers Victor full access to his resources, claiming he seeks only knowledge in return, though he hints that one day he may ask Victor for a favor. Victor says he'll consider the offer and leaves to reunite with his brother at last. William introduces him to his fiancée, Elizabeth, and the 3 share dinner together. What should be a warm reunion quickly turns tense when William remarks that Victor has always craved attention, and Elizabeth bluntly calls him foolish. Back in the present, Victor suddenly begins coughing up blood. The ship's doctor quickly gives him medicine, but before he can recover, shouting erupts outside. A crewman rushes to Captain Anderson, claiming someone spotted the creature approaching the ship. Anderson steps outside to look for himself, but sees nothing. The frightened crew demands that Victor be thrown overboard, convinced he's the cause of their danger. Anderson refuses, declaring that Victor remains under his protection. Nearby, unseen by the men, the creature watches the ship in silence. Once Anderson returns, Victor resumes his story. Weeks after the uncomfortable dinner, Henrik takes Victor and William to a forgotten castle hidden far from civilization. There, Victor finally accepts Henrik's proposal and lays out everything required to turn the ruined fortress into a cutting-edge laboratory. Soon after, Victor begins making regular trips to the nearby town, purchasing the bodies of executed criminals and secretly harvesting usable parts. One day in town, Victor is startled to see Elizabeth. Curious, he follows her and discovers she regularly visits the local church to confess her sins. Victor slips into the confessional booth first, pretending to be the priest so he can listen. Elizabeth admits that her brother-in-law is cruel and dangerous. Victor then opens the booth window, revealing himself, and realizes she knew his identity the entire time. Later, during a dinner gathering, Victor notices the books Elizabeth has purchased and learns she has a fascination with insects. She speaks passionately about science and the hidden beauty of small life forms, deeply impressing him. Moved by her intelligence, Victor asks her to dance. Over the following weeks, Victor continues collecting bodies and visiting blacksmiths to obtain specialized mechanical parts. At the same time, he grows closer to Elizabeth. His experiments, however, produce no results. Henrik confronts him privately, accusing him of losing focus because of a woman. With the war nearing its end, Henrik gives Victor one final week to achieve a breakthrough. Not long after, Elizabeth visits Victor at the laboratory. He confesses that he feels a deep connection to her and attempts to kiss her. Elizabeth pulls away, gently reminding him that she has already chosen William. After she leaves, Victor retreats to bathe, consumed by disappointment. In that quiet moment, inspiration strikes. He suddenly understands what his work has been missing. He alters the battery connections, and, at last, the body moves again. Victor and Henrik then travel to a battlefield, collecting as many bodies as possible. Over several days, Victor carefully selects only the finest parts, constructing a human form piece by piece. Henrik occasionally visits, documenting the progress with photographs. One evening, as a storm approaches, Victor prepares the creature for activation. He goes to find Henrik and discovers him hiding behind a mirror, nearly bald. Henrik reveals that the wig he's worn all along was hiding terminal cancer. With little time left, he finally reveals the true favor he wants: his brain transplanted into the creature, so he may live on. Victor refuses outright, and runs upstairs. On the castle rooftop, he climbs the tower and installs a device designed to channel lightning into the creature. When he returns, Henrik follows, desperately begging Victor to reconsider. He offers his fortune, and even Elizabeth, in exchange. Victor refuses again, explaining that Henrik's disease has corrupted every part of him, including his brain and blood. Enraged, Henrik grabs a critical component of the device and threatens to throw it down the tower shaft. Victor lunges to stop him. During the struggle, both Henrik and the device fall into the darkness below, killing Henrik instantly. Victor rushes down, confirms Henrik's death, retrieves the fallen component, and reconnects it to the machine. The device begins malfunctioning, forcing Victor to frantically make adjustments. When lightning finally strikes, sparks explode throughout the laboratory as electricity surges through the creature's body. Victor disconnects the system and checks for a pulse. There is none. Overcome with rage and despair, he storms to his room and dreams once more of the Dark Angel. The next morning, Victor wakes to the sound of his mother calling his name. He opens his eyes and freezes. The creature stands before him. Victor cautiously approaches. The creature mirrors his movements perfectly but recoils when sunlight floods the room. Victor gently teaches him that the light is harmless, makes him repeat his name, and embraces him, listening closely to the sound of his beating heart. Afterward, Victor leads the creature into a hidden tunnel beneath the castle and chains him there, keeping his existence secret for the time being. As the weeks pass, the creature grows physically stronger but remains unable to speak. Victor barely sleeps, forced to care for him like an infant, and grows increasingly resentful, especially whenever the creature reaches out to touch him. One day, the creature picks up a razor and accidentally cuts himself. Victor prepares to stitch the wound, only to discover, horrified, that it has already healed on its own. Whenever Victor loses his temper and lashes out, the creature recoils in fear, retreating from him like a scolded child. After weeks without hearing from Henrik, William and Elizabeth decide to visit the castle. Victor claims Henrik is away and will return soon. He quickly pulls William into the laboratory, eager to distract him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth hears strange sounds echoing through the tunnels. Following the noise, she stumbles upon the chained creature and freezes in shock. They cautiously touch hands, and Elizabeth gently asks who hurt him. Disturbed, she rushes back to the lab and confronts Victor, demanding to know why he would harm another man. Victor then brings both William and Elizabeth to the tunnel and admits the truth. He created the being before them. When the creature retrieves Elizabeth's fallen gloves and hands them back to her, William begins to wonder if it possesses intelligence. Victor avoids the question. William then realizes Victor never considered which part of the human body carries the soul. That night, the creature sits alone, watching leaves float across water as he drops them in. When Elizabeth visits him, he offers her a leaf in return. She attempts to teach him how to speak, guiding his throat and asking him to say her name. The creature remains silent, but after she leaves, he finally whispers it. When Victor sees Elizabeth return to the tunnels, he angrily scolds her. She takes offense when Victor refers to the creature as it. Victor erupts, ranting about the creature's lack of intelligence and blaming it on a failed neural connection. Elizabeth insists she saw awareness in his eyes and accuses Victor of playing God, calling him the real monster. Furious, Victor storms back to the tunnel and forces the creature to stand in a precise position. When the creature doesn't comply, Victor strikes him with a fire poker, unknowingly echoing the cruel discipline once used by his own father. After repeated blows and shouted orders, the creature finally roars, grabs the poker, and bends it effortlessly. He repeatedly cries Victor's name until Victor flees. The next morning, Victor tells William he has made a grave mistake and that the creature is far too dangerous. He shows him Henrik's corpse, claiming the creature murdered him. Convincing William that Elizabeth must be protected, Victor urges them to leave immediately. Before departing, William asks how long the creature will live. Victor coldly assures him it won't be long. After they leave, Victor pours gasoline throughout the tunnel laboratory. At the same time, Elizabeth feels a sudden sense of dread and begs the carriage driver to turn back. Victor gives the creature one final chance to speak. The creature repeats both Victor's and Elizabeth's names. For a brief moment, Victor hesitates, but decides it isn't enough. He sets the tunnel ablaze, leaving the creature chained inside. As Victor escapes, he hears the creature screaming his name in despair. Doubt overwhelms him, and he turns back. When he opens the door, a surge of fire blasts him backward, severely injuring his leg. Moments later, the tower explodes, collapsing in a massive fireball. When Elizabeth arrives, the ruins convince her she is too late. Back in the present, Captain Anderson hears screaming outside the ship and opens the door. The creature suddenly appears and knocks him down, preparing to kill him. Victor cries out, begging the creature to take him instead. When Anderson demands they both be ended, the creature pauses, deciding the captain deserves to hear his story. During the fire, pieces of the lightning device fell into the tunnel shaft, terrifying the creature. In his panic, he broke free from his chains, escaped through a drainage passage, and plunged into the ocean moments before the explosion. Sometime later, the creature awakens on a shoreline. He wanders into the forest, where he finds the skeletal remains of the bodies Victor used. From them, he fashions a jacket for himself. He marvels at deer grazing peacefully, feeding them berries before eating some himself. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out. A deer drops dead. Turning, the creature sees two hunters. Horrified by his appearance, they shoot him as well. The bullets wound him but fail to kill him, and he flees. After wandering for days, he finds a small farm and hides inside a shed, falling asleep while watching rats scurry nearby. The next morning, he overhears the hunters recounting their encounter to their family. Among them are an elderly blind man and a young girl. The creature secretly watches the family through cracks in the walls, sometimes following them into the forest. He is deeply moved by their kindness toward one another. The old man teaches the girl how to read, and by listening closely, the creature slowly learns to speak. As days pass, the creature longs to belong to this gentle family. He begins helping them in secret, repairing fences, stacking firewood, and leaving supplies outside their home. The blind man believes forest spirits are responsible and leaves offerings in gratitude, which the creature gladly accepts. One day, a pack of wolves descends on the farm, slaughtering the sheep. The creature watches in disbelief as the hunters gun the wolves down. For the first time, he understands that violence isn't always born from hatred. Sometimes death comes simply from existing in the wrong place. Not long after, winter approaches and the family leaves the farm, leaving the blind old man behind. With no one else around, the creature finally enters the house. The old man welcomes him warmly, mistaking him for a weary traveler. When the creature accidentally breaks a bottle, fear overwhelms him as he braces for punishment, but it never comes. Instead, the old man remains gentle and calm. The man soon realizes this visitor is the mysterious helper who has been aiding his family in secret. He invites the creature to stay, calling him a friend, even embracing him. Over the following days, the two grow close. They take walks together, read books, and share long conversations. The creature admits he remembers nothing from before awakening on the shore, though he sometimes dreams of a shadowy figure associated with the name Victor. The blind man encourages him to follow those visions. Guided by his dreams, the creature searches the land until he reaches the ruins of the destroyed castle. Among the wreckage, he finds Victor's journals and Henrik's photographs. At last, the truth of his creation is revealed. Inside an envelope, he finds Victor's full name and a city address. When the creature returns to the farm, horror greets him. Wolves have invaded the house. He rushes inside and is attacked. This time, he fights back with terrifying ferocity, killing several of the animals. The rest flee in fear. He finds a blind man badly injured but still breathing. The creature confesses that he now understands he is a monster. The old man gently corrects him, calling him a friend instead. Moments later, the man dies. Soon after, the hunters return. Recognizing the creature from the earlier incident with the deer, they assume he murdered the old man. They open fire and even stab him. When he refuses to die, fear overtakes them. They shoot him again until he collapses, then leave, believing him dead. Hours later, the creature awakens, his wounds already healed. He realizes he is truly immortal. If he must live forever, he decides, then he needs someone to share that eternity with. Meanwhile, Victor now lives with a prosthetic leg, tormented nightly by dreams of the dark angel and crushed by guilt. On the night of William's wedding, Victor visits Elizabeth to wish her happiness. She cannot bear the sight of him and slaps him, forcing him to leave. It's revealed she has kept the leaf the creature once gave her. Later that night, Victor returns to his room and finds the balcony door open. Turning, he sees the creature emerge from the shadows. The creature demands that Victor create him a companion. Victor refuses, unwilling to unleash another being like him. Enraged, the creature hurls Victor across the room, destroying everything in his path. Elizabeth hears the commotion and rushes in, overwhelmed with emotion when she sees the creature again. Seizing the moment, Victor grabs his gun and fires, but Elizabeth steps in front of the creature and is shot instead. The noise draws William and the wedding guests. Victor lies, claiming the creature murdered Elizabeth. The men attempt to restrain the creature, but he easily overpowers them, injuring many. Elizabeth, still alive, begs the creature to take her with him. He lifts her gently and leaves as the guests recoil in horror. Victor checks on William, who blames his brother for all the tragedy and calls Victor the true monster before dying. In a nearby cave, the creature lays Elizabeth down. She confesses she never felt she belonged in the world, until now. Through him, she believes she has become eternal. When she finally dies, the creature breaks down in grief. Victor soon enters the cave. The creature slams him against the wall, breaking his nose, and demands that Victor finish what he started, in the creation. Instead, the creature flees, taunting Victor to follow. Driven by revenge, Victor pursues him for weeks. Their chase leads them back to the frozen North Pole. Victor stocks up on weapons and dynamite, then waits inside a tent on the ice. When the creature tries to enter, Victor shoots his hand, forcing him back. The creature circles around, ambushing Victor from behind and dragging him outside. In the struggle, a lamp is knocked over, setting the tent ablaze. The creature shatters Victor's remaining leg and crushes his hand when Victor tries to stab him. He stabs Victor in the shoulder, then searches his bag. Finding the dynamite, the creature believes it may finally be enough. He forces Victor to light it and allows him to flee. Injured and slow, Victor cannot escape in time. The explosion sends him tumbling down a snow-covered slope. Still, the creature survives. That's when the ship's crew arrives. In the present, Victor grips the creature's hand and finally apologizes. He calls him his son and urges him to keep living. The creature forgives him. Victor dies peacefully as the creature kisses his forehead, calling him father. Captain Anderson orders his men to stand down and allows the creature to leave. In gratitude, the creature pushes the ship, freeing it from the ice at last. As the vessel sails away, the creature remains behind, staring at the sun, just as Victor once taught him. Analysis. What if the real monster was never the creature, but the human who chose to walk away? For over 200 years, Frankenstein has survived every era, every generation, and every technological leap, because it isn't really a horror story about a stitched-together body. It's a warning about obsession, responsibility, and the dangerous belief that intelligence alone makes us superior. Frankenstein, 2025, doesn't resurrect this story to shock you with lightning bolts and screaming experiments. It pulls the myth into the modern world, into an age where creation is easier than accountability and innovation moves faster than empathy. This version asks an uncomfortable question we still avoid today. Just because we can create something, does that mean we're prepared to take responsibility for it? What makes this film stand out is its restraint. The horror isn't loud. It's quiet, emotional, and deeply human. Fear comes not from the creature itself, but from abandonment, guilt, and consequences that can't be undone. In this video, we're diving deep into Frankenstein 2025, its story, themes, symbolism, and the meaning behind its most haunting moments. This isn't just a recap. It's a breakdown of why this story still matters, and why this adaptation might be the most unsettling version yet. So if you think you already know Frankenstein, stay with me, because this film isn't asking you to fear the monster. It's asking you to look at the creator. Released in 2025, Frankenstein returns once again, but not as a loud reboot or a spectacle-driven remake. This version takes a far more restrained and deliberate approach, choosing atmosphere, emotion, and moral tension over chaos and shock. Genre-wise, the film sits at the crossroads of horror, psychological drama, and science fiction. While it carries the DNA of classic Gothic horror, it feels unmistakably modern in its concerns. The fear here doesn't come from what hides in the dark. It comes from the choices made in the light. The setting exists in a bleak, almost timeless world. It blends old-world scientific aesthetics with contemporary ethical anxieties, making it hard to pin down to a single era. That ambiguity is intentional. It reminds us that the questions this story raises aren't confined to the past or the future, but belong to every generation. At its core, the premise is deceptively simple. A brilliant scientist pushes beyond the accepted limits of knowledge and succeeds. Life is created, but instead of triumph, the story immediately shifts toward consequence. What happens after creation, after the breakthrough, is where this film truly lives. Importantly, this is a spoiler-free experience built on tension and reflection. Frankenstein 2025 isn't interested in racing through plot points. It wants you to sit with discomfort, to feel the weight of ambition, and to understand that the true experiment isn't scientific, it's human. This overview sets the stage for everything that follows, because to understand this film, you first have to understand what kind of story it's trying to tell, and what kind of expectations you should leave at the door at first glance. Frankenstein 2025 wears the mask of a horror film, but that label only tells half the story. Yes, it uses the language of horror, shadows, isolation, unease. But its true identity is a psychological drama driven by moral conflict rather than monsters. The fear here doesn't arrive in sudden shocks. It builds slowly, growing heavier with every choice the characters make. The film's core theme is creation without responsibility. It asks what happens when human intelligence outruns empathy. Victor Frankenstein isn't portrayed as evil. He's portrayed as dangerously convinced that success justifies everything that comes after. And the creature? It isn't born cruel. It becomes cruel through neglect, rejection, and silence. Another powerful theme is isolation. Both creator and creation exist alone, trapped by their own decisions. One is isolated by ambition, the other by fear and misunderstanding. Their parallel suffering is what gives the story its emotional weight. Tonally, the film is somber, tragic, and deeply reflective. This is not a crowd-pleasing thrill ride. It's a slow-burn experience designed for viewers who appreciate symbolic storytelling, philosophical questions, and character-driven narratives. Frankenstein 2025 is made for an audience willing to sit with discomfort, to think, to reflect, and to question progress itself. Because in this story, the most terrifying thing isn't what science creates, it's what humanity fails to protect. Every tragedy begins with a decision, and in Frankenstein 2025, that decision is fueled by obsession. Victor Frankenstein is introduced not as a mad genius, but as a man consumed by the belief that knowledge has no moral boundary. His pursuit isn't driven by cruelty, but by certainty, the certainty that discovery itself justifies the risk. When his experiment finally succeeds, it feels like a victory over nature. But that moment of triumph doesn't last. The creation of life isn't followed by celebration. It's followed by fear. Victor recoils from what he's made, and in that instant, the real damage begins. The being he brings into the world isn't violent or hateful by nature. It learns those traits through abandonment. As the story unfolds, the film moves carefully from cause to effect. Each rejection deepens the creature's isolation. Each attempt by Victor to escape responsibility only accelerates the collapse around him. Loss follows loss, not because of fate or destiny, but because of human failure. Rather than racing from scene to scene, the narrative focuses on the emotional consequences of every choice. The monster becomes a reflection of its creator, not physically, but morally. And by the time conflict erupts, it no longer feels avoidable. It feels earned. This recap isn't just about what happens, it's about why it happens. Because in Frankenstein 2025, the horror isn't the act of creation, it's the refusal to take responsibility for what comes next. The ending of Frankenstein 2025 doesn't aim to shock you. It aims to corner you. By the time the film reaches its final moments, the story has already stripped away any illusion of heroes and villains. What remains is a shared burden, one that belongs to both creator and creation. The conflict doesn't end with triumph or destruction, but with recognition. What actually happens in the conclusion is less about action and more about acceptance. Victor is forced to confront the truth he's been avoiding since the moment of creation. The experiment didn't fail because of science. It failed because of abandonment. The creature, in turn, reaches an understanding that its suffering was shaped, not born. Symbolically, the ending reinforces the film's central message. Responsibility doesn't disappear once control is lost. Creation binds the creator forever. There is no clean escape, no moral reset. The film also resists giving us a single emotional answer. Is the ending a form of punishment, a quiet redemption, or simply the natural consequence of unchecked ambition? The ambiguity is intentional, inviting viewers to reflect rather than react. Frankenstein 2025 closes not with fear, but with discomfort. Because the most haunting endings aren't the ones that end the story, they're the ones that follow you out of the theater. Some films tell their story through dialogue. Frankenstein 2025 tells it through what it shows and what it hides. From the very beginning, the movie plants visual clues that quietly prepare you for what's coming. Crumbling walls, cold laboratories, and empty corridors aren't just set pieces. They mirror Victor Frankenstein's decaying sense of responsibility. The world around him begins to rot the moment he abandons what he creates. Light and shadow are used with purpose. The creature is often framed in soft, natural light, while humans appear in harsher, fractured shadows. It's a subtle reversal that challenges who we're supposed to fear and who we're supposed to question. Mirrors and reflections appear repeatedly throughout the film, blurring the line between creator and creation. These moments suggest that the monster isn't a separate entity, but a distorted reflection of Victor himself, his ambition, his guilt, and his moral failure given form. There's also careful foreshadowing hidden in early dialogue, background details, and even silence. Conversations that seem insignificant at first take on new meaning by the end. Pauses without music signal moments of ethical choice, not just tension. This chapter peels back those layers, breaking down the hidden symbolism, the details most viewers miss, and the visual storytelling that makes Frankenstein 2025 far richer than it appears on the surface. The recreating Frankenstein for a modern audience isn't about bigger effects or louder scares. It's about intent. And behind Frankenstein 2025, every creative choice feels deliberate. One of the most important behind-the-scenes decisions was how the creature would be portrayed. Instead of presenting it as a traditional horror icon, the filmmakers focused on emotional realism. The performance emphasizes vulnerability, confusion, and the slow build-up of pain, making the creature feel tragically human rather than monstrous. The production also made a conscious effort to limit excessive CGI. Practical effects, textured environments, and grounded cinematography were prioritized to maintain a physical, tangible presence. This choice gives the film a weight that many modern horror movies lack, making the world feel lived in and oppressive. In terms of adaptation, the film pulls heavily from the themes of Mary Shelley's novel rather than directly recreating scenes. Dialogue echoes philosophical ideas about creation, responsibility, and isolation without copying the original text, allowing the story to feel respectful but fresh. There are also subtle character details many viewers miss, small gestures, repeated behaviors, and changes in posture that reflect emotional transformation rather than plot exposition. This chapter dives into the fascinating facts, creative risks, and behind-the-scenes decisions that shaped Frankenstein 2025, because understanding how the film was made reveals why it feels so restrained, so haunting, and so intentionally human. Every time Frankenstein is retold, it faces the same challenge. How do you revisit one of the most adapted stories in history without repeating it? Frankenstein 2025 answers that by refusing to compete with earlier versions on spectacle. Unlike classic adaptations that leaned heavily into Gothic theatrics, or modern reboots that chased action and shock, this film chooses intimacy. It pulls the story inward, focusing less on the monster's appearance and more on the damage left behind by human choices. When compared to other modern sci-fi and horror films, this version aligns more closely with slow-burn, idea-driven stories rather than blockbuster thrills. It shares thematic ground with films that question technological progress and human arrogance, but it stands apart by keeping its conflict deeply personal instead of global. Where some adaptations portray Victor as a villain or the creature as pure horror, this film blurs that line. Both are victims of the same mistake: unchecked ambition without empathy. That moral ambiguity is where this version finds its strength. Of course, that approach comes with trade-offs. Viewers expecting constant tension or explosive set pieces may find it restrained. But for those looking for depth, reflection, and emotional weight, Frankenstein 2025 offers something rare. This chapter compares what this film does better, where it deliberately holds back, and why its quiet choices make it one of the most distinctive Frankenstein adaptations to date. Not every film is designed to be easily liked, and Frankenstein 2025 makes that clear from the moment the credits roll. Audience reactions have been sharply divided. Many viewers praise the film for its atmosphere, emotional depth, and thoughtful storytelling, calling it haunting and intellectually engaging. Others, however, criticize its slow pace and restrained horror, feeling it denies the thrills they expected from a Frankenstein movie. Critics, on the other hand, tend to approach the film on its own terms. Rather than judging it as a traditional horror reboot, many recognize it as a literary, character-driven adaptation, one more interested in meaning than momentum. That perspective has led to stronger critical appreciation, especially for its performances, direction, and thematic ambition. This split has fueled an ongoing debate. Is Frankenstein 2025 underrated because it challenges mainstream expectations, or is it simply too demanding for casual viewers? In this chapter, we break down audience responses versus critical reactions, explore why opinions clash so strongly, and explain how this division actually reinforces the film's core message. Because sometimes, the most polarizing movies are the ones brave enough to ask uncomfortable questions. So, after all the ambition, the tragedy, and the unanswered questions, what do we really make of Frankenstein 2025? This film's greatest strength is its restraint. It chooses atmosphere over excess, emotion over spectacle, and meaning over momentum. The performances ground the story in humanity, and the film's quiet confidence allows its themes to breathe instead of being spelled out. Meanwhile, the so-called monster is presented as largely gentle and compassionate, only turning violent when attacked or when those he cares for are threatened. This shift makes the creature far more sympathetic, and it worked on me emotionally. I found myself unexpectedly close to tears more than once. In many ways, the film presses all the right emotional buttons, resulting in a visually rich and humane interpretation that feels like one of the strongest cinematic versions so far, especially when seen on a large screen. The framing device places the story in 1857, where a Danish expedition trapped in Arctic ice encounters Victor Frankenstein, who is fleeing from his creation. From there, Victor recounts the events that led him to this point. It's clear this film is a passion project for Del Toro, and the production values reflect that commitment. The craftsmanship is impressive, and the world feels meticulously designed. That said, the story itself is so well known that it rarely feels surprising. While the execution is polished, I'm not convinced the film brings significant new insight to the material. Watching it, I couldn't help comparing it to more radical reinterpretations of similar themes in recent cinema, which feel far more daring by comparison. This adaptation may be the first version of Frankenstein that could realistically compete in major awards conversations, thanks largely to its bold visual style. However, that style sometimes becomes overwhelming. Much like earlier high-profile adaptations, the film leans heavily into visual excess, occasionally at the expense of narrative depth. At 2.5 hours, the runtime feels indulgent, and stretches of the film come across as self-important rather than engrossing. The heavy technical emphasis also makes it difficult to fully assess the performances, as character nuance is often buried beneath elaborate presentation. Oscar Isaac brings restraint and subtlety to his portrayal of Victor, suggesting madness through quiet choices rather than grand gestures. Mia Goth's Elizabeth is unsettling in her own way, interacting with the creature as though he were something to be shaped or possessed rather than understood. Jacob Elordi's creature, however, is so obscured by makeup and design that his performance struggles to leave a strong impression beneath the surface. Visually, the film is undeniably striking, but modern filmmaking techniques raise questions about authenticity. It's often difficult to tell where physical sets end and digital imagery begins, which can make the experience feel artificial. For some viewers, this contributes to sensory overload, loud sound design, hyper-polished visuals, and a sense of visual phoniness that can distract rather than immerse. Certain body horror sequences, particularly those depicting the creature's assembly, are likely to unsettle many viewers, with imagery that borders on grotesque for shock value rather than narrative necessity. Del Toro writes and directs as though he is offering a definitive reinterpretation of Shelley's novel, yet several thematic elements feel underdeveloped or missing altogether. In the end, I'd rank this film roughly on par with the mid-1990s adaptation. Not better, not worse. I'd like to believe filmmakers will finally leave this literary classic alone, but history suggests otherwise. While I respect Del Toro as a filmmaker, I still feel his strongest work came earlier in his career, particularly his Spanish-language films, which balanced atmosphere, emotion, and storytelling more effectively. As his projects have grown larger and more effects-driven, they've begun to feel emptier, more focused on spectacle than substance. I felt this shift in some of his previous films, and I feel it again here. Despite an excellent cast and impressive visuals, the film lacks lasting emotional impact. By the end, I found myself wondering what new idea this adaptation was truly trying to convey. That said, I did enjoy the film overall. I've seen nearly every major interpretation of the Frankenstein story dating back to the silent era, and this one, for all its flaws, still holds a place among the more ambitious efforts. To claim that this film is a faithful adaptation of Mary Shelley's original work would be misleading. Aside from the presence of a character named Frankenstein and the basic idea of creating life from assembled body parts, the movie strays far from the novel. Much of what unfolds on screen has little connection to the source material. One of the most jarring differences is the creature's ability to regenerate tissue, including entire limbs. He is shot repeatedly, yet his wounds close and missing parts simply grow back. This raises obvious questions. Where does this power come from? I certainly don't recall the creature in the novel possessing the strength to haul an entire ship free from ice. The portrayal of a young woman is another major departure. Her character bears little resemblance to her literary counterpart, and the final scene only reinforces how far this adaptation diverges from a book. While Guillermo del Toro remains one of my favorite filmmakers and has delivered remarkable work in many areas here, it feels disingenuous to present this as a true representation of Mary Shelley's novel. Before diving further, I should clarify something. I've never actually read the original novel. That said, I've seen enough adaptations over the years to understand the core elements of the story. Even with that familiarity, this version still manages to tweak expectations and offer a few genuinely surprising moments along the way. If you've never experienced a Del Toro film before, be prepared. You're in for something distinctive. The production design and costumes are absolutely stunning, overflowing with creativity and detail. The cast is equally impressive, with every performance feeling committed and purposeful. Oscar Isaac even mentioned during the press tour that the monster created in the film might not be entirely physical. Personally, I don't find the movie all that ambiguous on this point, but viewers can decide for themselves. Isaac's performance is so compelling that it's easy to overlook just how deeply troubled his character truly is. The film shows him at various stages of his life, revealing what he endured as a child, which helps explain why audiences may feel sympathy for him. His transformation is gradual, not a sudden shift, but a slow unveiling of his darker nature. Mia Goth enters the story relatively late, but her presence leaves a strong impression. Her introduction is striking, visually unforgettable, and instantly iconic. Her look alone, right down to the details in her hair, feels destined to inspire Halloween costumes for years to come. The back and forth between characters forms the emotional core of the film, holding everything together. Cinematography and visual choices are clearly deliberate, and there's enough depth here that a single viewing doesn't do it justice. While it's disappointing that the movie received only a limited theatrical release, its quick transition to streaming almost feels like a small consolation. Not that the film itself is full of blessings, but that's another discussion entirely. It's also worth noting the recurring confusion around the name Frankenstein. Many still mistakenly apply it to the creature rather than its creator, a misunderstanding the film subtly plays with, even in its own summary moments. I didn't need any convincing to sit down and watch Guillermo del Toro's 2025 interpretation of Frankenstein. His version takes Shelley's foundation and reshapes it with his own sensibilities, and while it's far from revolutionary, it was refreshing and enjoyable. This is a story that's been adapted countless times, so originality isn't easy to achieve, but Del Toro finds ways to make it feel renewed. The film runs a lengthy 152 minutes and likely could have benefited from tighter editing. Still, the ensemble cast is strong across the board, featuring a lineup of highly capable actors who deliver solid performances throughout. Visually, the film excels. The special effects are impressive and essential to selling the story's darker, more fantastical elements. As expected from a Del Toro production, the craftsmanship is evident in every frame. In the end, I'd rate Frankenstein 2025 a solid 7 out of 10. I wouldn't go so far as to say it surpasses the 1931 Boris Karloff classic, but stands as a confident and well-crafted reinterpretation. Even the earlier adaptations weren't entirely faithful to Shelley's novel, and the creative liberties taken here expand the tragedy of a creature born from scientific ambition and doomed to spiral into chaos. Both versions hold similar standing among audiences today, though neither quite tops the brilliance of Mel Brooks' unforgettable parody, Young Frankenstein, 1974. Much like Young Frankenstein, this film knowingly steps in a territory shaped by earlier sequels, such as Bride of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein. Attentive cinema lovers will quickly notice the callbacks, especially in the latter stretch involving the elderly blind man, played with quiet warmth by David Bradley. While the idea of a bride is never fully realized here, it lingers as a haunting desire, voiced through the creature's plea to Victor Frankenstein to grant him companionship. That longing becomes one of the film's more emotionally resonant threads. This adaptation introduces the Harlander family as entirely new creations. Elizabeth Harlanda, portrayed by Mia Goth, whose casting feels intentionally symbolic, is a more outspoken and intellectually curious reimagining of Elizabeth Lavenza from Mary Shelley's novel. Her presence opens several possible narrative paths, and although the story could have taken her fate in many directions, the choices ultimately made feel measured and effective rather than sensational. The film is divided into two narrative halves, alternating between Victor's perspective and that of the creature. In its latter portion, the story leans heavily into both tragedy and madness. Victor comes to welcome death as an escape, while the creature suffers under the cruel irony of immortality. In a moment of quiet devastation, he forgives his creator, suggesting that perhaps acceptance, rather than life or death, is what finally allows them to be human. Visually, the film is lush and meticulous, filled with rich period detail, carefully crafted sets, and striking costumes. It feels purpose-built for awards recognition. Viewers who admire Shelley's novel or the countless reinterpretations of the Frankenstein legend will likely find much to appreciate here, and some may even consider it a definitive favorite. Guillermo del Toro's interpretation of the iconic monster is both reverent and deeply personal, and absolutely worth experiencing. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein remains one of the most frequently adapted novels in literary history. Until now, Kenneth Branagh's version was often cited as the closest to the source material. Del Toro's take, however, reframes the story through a modern lens, emphasizing that Victor's unchecked ego, and not the creature, is the true monstrosity. At the same time, the creature is granted emotional complexity and moral clarity rarely seen in prior adaptations. Del Toro has openly expressed his desire to adapt Shelley's novel for nearly 20 years, and his long-held passion is evident throughout. Though he insists the film is not a traditional horror story, its themes of obsession, loss, and identity carry a haunting weight. I was fully on board from its theatrical release through its eventual arrival on Netflix. The narrative opens in the Arctic, where an expedition ship becomes trapped in frozen ice. The crew, led by Captain Anderson, rescues a critically injured Victor Frankenstein. Their survival soon comes under threat when a powerful creature boards the ship, displaying extraordinary strength and rapid regeneration. Before vanishing into the ice, it demands that Victor be brought before it. Forced to confront his past, Victor begins recounting the events that led him there. Through flashbacks, we learn of Victor's troubled upbringing. His mother dies during childbirth. His father, an esteemed but cruel physician, rules the household with emotional abuse, and Victor grows up overshadowed by his favored younger brother. These experiences shape him into a brilliant yet deeply arrogant surgeon, determined to conquer death itself. His controversial experiments eventually cost him his position at the Royal College of Surgeons, but attract the attention of industrialist Henrik Harlanda, who funds Victor's work without restraint. Together, they transform an abandoned tower into a hidden laboratory. As Victor's obsession deepens, he becomes entangled in complicated emotions toward Elizabeth, Harlanda's niece, who ultimately rejects him. Pressured for results, Victor turns to morally questionable methods, harvesting bodies from executed criminals and fallen soldiers. His belief that electricity could reignite life leads to a climactic experiment involving lightning itself. The experiment collapses into chaos when Harlanda, terminally ill, demands to inhabit the new body. A violent confrontation ends in Harlanda's death, and Victor presses on alone. Though the experiment appears to fail, Victor awakens the next morning to discover the creature alive. He teaches it language, beginning with his own name, before imprisoning it beneath the tower, setting the stage for the tragic bond that will define both their fates. The creature displays extraordinary physical power along with an accelerated ability to heal, and it isn't long before William and Elizabeth uncover the truth behind Victor's experiment. Elizabeth, unlike Victor, begins to see the creature as more than a failed experiment. She shows it kindness, teaches it to say her name, and questions Victor's increasingly cruel behavior toward his own creation. Victor, however, grows irritated by the creature's slow intellectual progress and becomes deeply unsettled by its clear fascination with Elizabeth, allowing jealousy to take hold. In an act of cowardice, he falsely accuses the creature of killing Harlinda. Consumed by fear and convinced that the creature poses a danger, Victor sets fire to his laboratory with the being still trapped inside, even as he hears it desperately call out Elizabeth's name. Regret hits him too late. When he attempts to return, an explosion hurls him into the rocks, costing him a leg. In the present timeline, the creature emerges from beneath the ice and makes its way back to the ship, where it finds a weakened Victor in the care of the captain. There, the creature begins recounting its past. It is revealed that the creature survived the blast and escaped before the tower was destroyed. Lost and hunted, it wanders into the forest and eventually hides near a remote farmhouse. From there, it quietly observes a blind old man, David Bradley, teaching his granddaughter how to read. Remaining unseen, the creature secretly aids the struggling family during harsh times, earning the name, the Spirit of the Forest. When the family departs for the winter, the abandoned creature finally reveals itself to the blind man, who accepts him without fear. The old man teaches him to read properly and speak fluently, offering him true companionship for the first time. Driven by curiosity about his origins, the creature travels back to Victor's tower and discovers notes that explain his creation and reveal Victor's home. Upon returning to the farmhouse, tragedy strikes. The blind man has been mauled by wolves. The creature battles the animals but arrives too late. As he mourns his only friend, the returning family mistakenly believes he is responsible for the man's death and violently drives him away. This moment cements the creature's realization that he is nearly indestructible and doomed to eternal isolation. On the night of William and Elizabeth's wedding, the creature confronts Victor and demands that he create a companion, so he will no longer be alone. Victor refuses, horrified by his own past actions and determined not to repeat his mistake. The confrontation turns violent, but Elizabeth intervenes and embraces the creature, recognizing his pain. Victor attempts to shoot his creation, but Elizabeth is fatally wounded while trying to protect it. Chaos erupts. William is mortally injured, and with his dying breath admits that he has always feared Victor. The creature carries Elizabeth to a cave, offering comfort as she passes away. Victor, now consumed by vengeance, chases the creature into the frozen Arctic, where his final attempt to kill it with dynamite fails. He collapses and is rescued by Anderson's crew. On board the ship, Victor finally apologizes for his cruelty before dying. The creature, having forgiven him, pushes the ship free from the ice. Anderson abandons his obsessive quest and orders the crew to return home. Left behind, the creature watches the ship disappear and steps into the sunlight, recalling the lessons Victor once taught him. The supporting cast adds considerable depth, with Nikolai Lykos as Chief Officer Larson, Lauren Collins as the hunter's wife, Sophia Galasso as Anna Maria, Ralph Ineson as Professor Krimp, Peter Millard as Professor Stokold, Peter McNeil as Professor Morris, and Bern Gorman as the executioner. Isaac delivers a convincing performance as the unhinged scientist playing God, while Walt shines as his equally unstable benefactor. Goth fits perfectly as the unconventional love interest. Dance leaves a strong impression as the cruel father figure, and Elordi nearly steals the film as the tragic, man-made monster. The film strongly recalls Kenneth Branagh's adaptation in its devotion to Mary Shelley's novel, leaning more into emotional depth than outright horror. It explores sorrow, rejection, and humanity rather than cheap scares. Every performance feels committed. The cinematography and production design are gorgeous, and Alexander Desplat's score elevates the drama. The makeup, effects, and bursts of brutality are effective without being excessive. Overall, it stands as a polished and emotionally rich Gothic science fiction epic, and absolutely worth watching. Now streaming on Netflix, this film completely absorbed me from start to finish. I genuinely found myself thinking it might be one of the strongest films of 2025. The storytelling, visuals, Music, costumes, sets, and performances all feel awards-ready, and time will tell if recognition follows. It wasn't my wife's kind of movie, she bowed out early. But for me, after decades of watching countless Frankenstein adaptations, this stands out as something special. It may be the most faithful interpretation of Shelley's original work I've seen yet. I'll definitely be watching it again, and that alone says everything. Another cinematic take on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This version presents the tale as a lush, tragic Gothic romance, guided by Guillermo del Toro's careful, atmospheric touch, more soulful than savage, but deeply affecting nonetheless. Frankenstein isn't really a traditional horror film, and that choice will probably split longtime fans. Guillermo del Toro leans heavily into romance and melancholy rather than pure terror, making the film feel closer in spirit to The Shape of Water than to earlier, more conventional adaptations like the 1994 version. There's even a faint fairy tale quality to it, echoing something like Beauty and the Beast. The story unfolds through flashbacks, beginning aboard a frozen Danish naval vessel near the North Pole in 1857. A gravely injured surgeon, rescued from the ice, warns the ship's captain that a monstrous figure is hunting him, an unnatural man assembled in a remote castle laboratory from the remains of fallen soldiers and executed criminals. One of the stranger elements surrounding the creature is his ability to recover from near-fatal injuries. Gunshots and icy submersion only slow him temporarily before his body repairs itself, allowing him to continue his grim pursuit of vengeance. The first section of the film focuses on Victor Frankenstein's early life, portraying him as a sheltered child deeply attached to his mother and emotionally scarred by a harsh, unloving father. While these sequences are beautifully staged, they sometimes feel longer than necessary. The second half shifts perspective to the creature himself, who is rejected by his creator for his perceived intellectual shortcomings. After escaping the castle's destruction by fire, he secretly survives beneath the home of a woodsman and his family, easily one of the film's most touching and effective passages. From there, the narrative escalates through a brutal wolf attack, a wedding that ends in tragedy, and an inevitable confrontation, all handled with confidence and emotional weight. Christoph Waltz appears as the Baron's financial backer, though his role is surprisingly understated and quickly discarded. Oscar Isaac delivers a strong performance as Dr. Frankenstein, while Jacob Elordi brings an unexpectedly compelling presence to the creature. His portrayal, fragile, wounded, and quietly tragic, takes time to settle in, but ultimately proves effective. Visually, Dan Lawson's cinematography is striking, and Alexander Desplat's musical score adds a sweeping, emotional depth that feels awards-worthy. Despite its lengthy runtime of around 2.5 hours, Del Toro guides the story to its conclusion with elegance and sincerity, making the journey rewarding for most viewers. On a purely visual level, the film is breathtaking. Even when the story falters, it remains a pleasure to watch. The narrative largely follows the traditional path of Mary Shelley's novel, charting Dr. Frankenstein's obsessive ambition to create life and the consequences that follow once his creation fails to live up to his expectations. Abuse, cruelty, and neglect drive the creature toward his eventual escape and violent emergence into the world. Performances across the board are strong, and the casting feels deliberate and well-matched. The film's rhythm also helps the long runtime pass more smoothly than expected, making it feel shorter than it actually is. In many ways, this is Del Toro operating firmly within his dark, Gothic comfort zone. That said, the film isn't without flaws. While the production design, costumes, makeup, and period detail are exceptional, there's an overdependence on CGI that occasionally detracts from the experience. Certain large-scale moments, particularly an explosive sequence in the digital wolves, feel excessive and unfinished compared to the otherwise practical, tactile effects. This is especially noticeable because the opening sequence aboard the ship is so grounded and intense, setting expectations the rest of the film doesn't always meet. Pacing is another issue. The movie shifts abruptly between high-energy horror and lengthy, dialogue-heavy stretches that slow the momentum and test patience. The acting remains one of the film's strongest assets. Jacob Elordi stands out as the creature, delivering a performance that is both unsettling and deeply human. Mia Goth brings an eerie, hypnotic quality that fits seamlessly into Del Toro's world. Oscar Isaac is solid as Frankenstein, though he never fully dominates the role the way the character perhaps demands. Overall, the film is uneven but undeniably ambitious. I'd give it a 6 out of 10, worth watching, as long as expectations are set correctly. Among Guillermo del Toro's filmography, this stands as one of his stronger efforts, though Pan's Labyrinth remains his crowning achievement in my view. Still, it's hard to imagine a better filmmaker for adapting Mary Shelley's Gothic classic. The visual language, mood, and emotional weight feel perfectly suited to his sensibilities. While the film may run a little long, the stunning imagery largely compensates. With so many Frankenstein adaptations already in existence, this version manages to rise above most of them, and may even be one of the best interpretations yet. Can I be honest for a moment? I've always felt that Guillermo del Toro tends to be praised a little more than he deserves. So it probably shouldn't come as a shock that his take on Frankenstein transforms a novel rich with ideas into a lengthy, overly literal film obsessed with grand monster theatrics and blunt displays of violence. Any hope that the audience might be allowed to form their own emotional or intellectual reactions is quickly crushed. The movie is relentless in telling you exactly what to think and how to feel every step of the way. Take, for instance, the symbolism involving Mia Goth's character and the butterfly she captures. If you're wondering whether that's meant to mirror her own situation, don't worry. You'll get a full monologue spelling it out in painfully clear terms. Or consider the age-old question. Has Victor Frankenstein become more monstrous than the being he created? Between Oscar Isaac's wildly exaggerated performance and Del Toro's heavy-handed direction, the answer is already obvious. Yet the film still has a character stated outright, just in case you missed the point. And whenever there's even a slight risk you might have to connect the dots yourself, an endless voiceover swoops in to do the thinking for you. The film nearly achieves emotional weight in its final moments, but it never quite gets there, and by then it's far too late. Yes, the visual design is striking, but impressive imagery alone isn't enough to justify sitting through nearly 2.5 hours. The latter half, especially when the perspective shifts to Jacob Elordi's creature, slows to a crawl. And it's genuinely baffling how the embarrassingly poor CGI wolves and sheep were approved at any stage. In the end, no adaptation has truly matched the power and restraint of James Whale's original version. That said, greetings once again from the darkness. As someone who has loved cinema for as long as I can remember, I naturally gravitate toward filmmakers who clearly share that passion. Names like Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg, and Christopher Nolan come to mind. Another director who belongs in this conversation, perhaps unexpectedly for some, is Guillermo del Toro, an Oscar winner for Pinocchio, 2022, and The Shape of Water, 2017. His filmography also includes standout works like Crimson Peak, 2015, and Pan's Labyrinth, 2006. Del Toro has long described Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, as his lifelong dream project. That dream has finally materialized, and visually speaking, it's breathtaking. The film exceeds expectations in its aesthetic ambition, though viewers should be aware that its tone and thematic focus diverge sharply from more traditional adaptations. Given how many times this story has been retold, that alone is noteworthy. Once again, the film reinforces just how extraordinary Shelley's original novel truly is. While this version doesn't reinvent the story, it certainly stands apart from what audiences typically expect from a Frankenstein film. By setting the narrative in 1857, nearly 4 decades after the novel, Del Toro gains the advantage of historical progress and greater audience familiarity with the era. Strangely enough, The heart of the film feels less about monsters and more about humanity itself, how we express it, suppress it, and sometimes betray it. The opening sequence in the Arctic, where creator Oscar Isaac and creation Jacob Elordi cross paths once more after a series of events only clarified later, is both haunting and visually stunning. Central to this moment is Captain Anderson, played by Lars Mikkelsen, whose ship and crew play a crucial role in the unfolding drama. Victor Frankenstein is portrayed as a man consumed by ambition, part scientist, part self-appointed god. His obsession with control overshadows even his successes, ensuring that the creature enters the world burdened by pain, isolation, and confusion. Del Toro clearly believes that a laboratory-born experiment can possess a deeply tortured soul, echoing the sentiment found in earlier cinematic interpretations. It's here that Jacob Elordi truly impresses, delivering a powerful performance beneath layers of prosthetics. Supporting performances by Christoph Waltz and Mia Goth in dual roles are equally strong, and it's best to leave their characters unexplored, as they are essential to the film's emotional and narrative impact. Beyond the tragic and haunting story lies a film that stands on its own as a visual masterpiece. Del Toro is supported by an exceptional creative team, including cinematographer Dan Lawson, production designer Tamara de Varela, set decorator Shane Vial, and composer Alexander Desplat, whose sweeping score feels destined for awards recognition. This may have been Guillermo del Toro's dream project, and while it's not without flaws, it is undeniably a monumental achievement. Dreams, it seems, really can come true. And despite my criticisms, there's no denying that Guillermo del Toro remains one of the most inventive filmmakers working today. Over the years, Guillermo del Toro has taken well-known stories and filtered them through his own shadowy, lyrical imagination. From the influence of Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954, which eventually evolved into his Oscar-winning The Shape of Water, 2017, to his unsettling stop-motion reinterpretation of Pinocchio in 2022, Del Toro has consistently reshaped familiar myths into deeply personal works. Now, in 2025, he turns his attention to one of the most legendary horror tales of all time, Frankenstein, and once again delivers something mesmerizing. The definitive cinematic image of Frankenstein's monster was forged decades ago by James Whale in Frankenstein, 1931, and Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Countless filmmakers have attempted to revisit Mary Shelley's novel since then, yet few have managed to recreate the strange beauty and madness of Whale's vision. Del Toro, however, doesn't try to imitate it. Instead, he dismantles the familiar framework and rebuilds it entirely. This Frankenstein never feels like a remake or a modern reboot. It feels like a resurrection. In a daring inversion, the creature is portrayed as gentle, almost sacred, while Victor Frankenstein himself emerges as the true horror. Spoiler? Maybe, but it's a reveal worth knowing because it sets the stage for a film that is as emotionally overwhelming as it is visually stunning. The narrative unfolds in two clearly divided movements, one centered on Victor Frankenstein, the other on the being he creates. Victor's obsession begins in childhood, shaped by the devastating loss of his mother. That early trauma grows into a fixation with defying death itself. As he matures into a doctor, this fixation drives him toward an experiment that crosses every moral boundary. Backed financially by Henrik, Christoph Waltz, Victor gains the means to pursue his ambition. Henrik's condition is simple and terrifying. If Victor succeeds, the same method must be used to spare him from death. Victor achieves the impossible, reanimating a corpse through electricity. But the moment success arrives, panic follows. Repulsed by what he has made, Victor burns everything down. Still, the creature survives. From here on, the story shifts perspective, allowing the creation to tell his own version of events, and everything we thought we knew about him begins to change. Traditionally, Frankenstein's monster has been depicted as a brute driven by violence. Del Toro rejects that idea entirely. His creature thinks, feels, and learns. He observes the world with curiosity and sorrow, slowly developing a sense of self. His growing bond with Elizabeth introduces an unexpected tenderness, even romance, blending ideas from both Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. What starts as gothic horror gradually evolves into a revenge story, but one told from the opposite side. In Whale's original film, the monster kills an elderly villager. Here, he forms a friendship instead. This reversal perfectly captures Del Toro's message. Monstrosity is not born, it is created. Logic does occasionally bend under the weight of fantasy, particularly in how quickly the creature grasps human emotion. But Del Toro isn't chasing realism. He's chasing feeling, and the emotional payoff more than justifies the liberties taken. Not every element lands smoothly. Victor's characterization can feel excessively cruel, sometimes without clear motivation, particularly in his treatment of Elizabeth and his own work. A hanging sequence underscored by unexpectedly playful music weakens what should be a grim moment. Elizabeth's attraction to the creature is intriguing on paper, but its execution feels uneven. Where fear would normally dominate, fascination takes over too easily. Even so, these issues do little to diminish the film's power as a bold and imaginative reworking of a classic story. Oscar Isaac delivers a convincing performance as Victor, capturing both his brilliance and his moral decay. Still, the film belongs to Jacob Elordi. As the creature, he is extraordinary. His movement, voice, and expressive eyes communicate pain, innocence, and awakening with remarkable depth. Mia Goth plays Elizabeth with restraint. She may lack traditional Gothic mystique, but that restraint suits the film's grounded melancholy. Christoph Waltz balances warmth and threat effortlessly, while Lars Mikkelsen and Felix Kammer leave strong impressions despite limited screen time. David Bradley is especially moving as the blind man, providing one of the film's most emotionally resonant scenes. Charles Dance, Lauren Collins, and the rest of the cast perform solidly, even if their roles remain brief. From a visual standpoint, Frankenstein is breathtaking. The cinematography shifts subtly between Victor's sterile, icy world and the creature's softer, more natural surroundings. The Gothic production design is rich with shadow, candlelight, and storm-filled skies that echo the story's emotional weight. The score largely enhances the imagery, though its tonal shifts can feel inconsistent. Editing becomes sharper after the first hour, tightening the pacing and driving the story forward. Ultimately, though, the film's greatest strength is Guillermo del Toro himself. His direction transforms a familiar legend into something haunting, heartfelt, and unmistakably his own. Guillermo del Toro may work within a classical storytelling cadence, but his mastery of mood and feeling is unmistakable. He has a rare ability to take an age-old legend and reshape it into something that feels both timeless and contemporary, shifting terror into compassion and dread into contemplation. Del Toro consistently finds grace in the monstrous and warmth in the grotesque, and that perspective remains one of the defining qualities of his work. Frankenstein may not be perfect, but it is bold, lyrical, and unmistakably its own. This isn't just another retelling. It's a reinterpretation that asks us to rethink monsters, creators, and even divinity itself. Once again, Del Toro proves he's among the few filmmakers capable of animating death with genuine soul. Frankenstein, 2025, is clearly one of Del Toro's long-held passion projects, a story he has been circling in various forms throughout his career. It continues his familiar philosophy, that horror is best expressed as myth, that subtext is unnecessary when ideas can be worn openly, and that humanity itself is the true villain. While the film admirably leans into practical effects, showcasing impressive prosthetics, detailed makeup, elaborate costumes, and grand physical sets, it ultimately carries the unmistakable polish of a modern Netflix production, and not in a flattering way. The visuals are pristine to a fault, overly sharp, overly clean, wrapped in a faint digital gloss that dulls the physicality of even the most tactile elements. The camera frequently glides through vast, carefully constructed environments, and there's no denying the craftsmanship behind nearly every frame. You can feel the labor and intention behind the sets and props, yet the film strangely lacks atmosphere and weight. Despite moments of graphic imagery and close attention to the gruesome mechanics of body assembly, the experience never truly unsettles. The violence is visible, sometimes explicit, but it rarely lands emotionally. You witness the horror, but you don't feel it. While the film doesn't need to function as pure horror, it arguably should evoke more discomfort than it does. At times, its polished aesthetic even recalls a sanitized, family-friendly fantasy tone, an observation I reluctantly agree with, even if it feels almost unfair. That said, it's still among the more visually ambitious streaming originals, driven by a clear creative vision and an evident sense of care. The budget is very much present on screen, and in many moments, it pays off. Certain sequences look genuinely striking, even if the overall style doesn't fully align with what one might expect or hope for from this material. As for the adaptation itself, I haven't read the original novel, but based on what I understand, Del Toro seems torn between fidelity and reinterpretation. Some aspects suggest deep reverence for the source, while others feel simplified or misunderstood. I can't fairly compare it to the book, nor do I think stacking it against older film versions would be especially useful. What I can say is that the story here feels smoothed down, its rough edges sanded away. The moral ambiguity that defines the tale appears flattened, with complex ethical questions pushed into clearer, more digestible binaries. The emotional beats are direct to the point of bluntness, and the narrative often feels rushed where it should linger. The final stretch, in particular, moves at such speed that both central characters seem to abandon their emotional trajectories rather than complete them. As a result, the conclusion lacks the resonance it's clearly aiming for. Still, despite these frustrations, and despite pacing that occasionally drags, the film remains watchable and engaging. Even when it becomes less provocative than it should be, it never quite loses your attention. It may sound like I'm down on it, but that's not entirely true. I do like the film, flaws and all. It's not among Del Toro's finest achievements, but it's far from a misfire. Certain elements are deeply satisfying, and while it doesn't linger in the mind as long as it perhaps should, it holds together as a cohesive and unusual straight-to-streaming spectacle. Performance-wise, most of the cast hover just above autopilot. Oscar Isaac's exaggerated British accent threatens to derail the film more than once. Yet oddly enough, it also injects enough energy to keep things afloat. The real standout, however, is Jacob Elordi. His portrayal of the creature is gentle, restrained, and unexpectedly moving. His performance stands among the strongest interpretations of the character, and he consistently commands attention, outshining nearly everyone else he shares the frame with. To be fair, he's arguably the only actor the screenplay truly works in favor of. Others, Mia Goth included, aren't given nearly as much to work with, even though his performance benefits from the fact that so much of it relies on physicality rather than dialogue. Ultimately, this is a confident adaptation that falters somewhat due to a shortage of atmosphere, subtlety, and moral ambiguity, yet it gains strength from the director's practical sensibilities and his deep understanding of the peculiarities within the source material. Netflix's willingness to give the filmmaker creative freedom, earned through years of industry trust, allows those quirks to remain intact. The film is carefully assembled and clearly made with passion, even if the artistic direction doesn't always feel like the most fitting choice. It's imperfect, but undeniably entertaining. Frankenstein 2025 is an ambitious Gothic reimagining that brings together an impressive ensemble including Oscar Isaac, Jacob Elordi, Mia Goth, Christoph Waltz, Felix Kammer, Charles Dance, David Bradley, and Lars Mikkelsen. This long-gestating passion project serves as a cinematic love letter to Mary Shelley's iconic creation. Isaac delivers a committed performance as the obsessive, not-so-sane scientist consumed by his desire to create life, while Elordi, buried beneath strikingly detailed makeup, imbues the creature with a deeply human longing for acceptance. Their dynamic unfolds like a tragic father and son myth, spiraling toward inevitable destruction. The film thrives on its craftsmanship. The production design is rich and immersive, the cinematography drenched in shadow and texture, and the score carefully calibrated to heighten emotion without overpowering it. Costume design further grounds the world in Gothic elegance. Goth brings emotional conflict to Elizabeth, while Bradley lends warmth and dignity to the blind man, one of the film's most quietly affecting presences. Taken as a whole, the movie feels meticulously composed, with every department working in harmony. Written and directed by Guillermo del Toro, Frankenstein, 2025, adapts Shelley's 1818 novel into a dark, character-driven meditation on ambition and consequence. It follows Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant but deeply self-absorbed scientist whose pursuit of creation sets off a chain of irreversible events. As someone who had high expectations for this project, I'm pleased to say the film largely lives up to the anticipation. Among its many strengths, this stands as Del Toro's most accomplished work since Pan's Labyrinth. The level of care poured into every aspect of production, from set design and makeup to cinematography and music, is unmistakable. The budget is clearly on screen, but more importantly, so is the intention. While the core story remains familiar, Del Toro's personal style reshapes it into something that feels contemporary without losing its literary soul. The cast delivers across the board, with strong performances from Isaac, Goth, Mikkelsen, and Waltz, but the film undeniably belongs to Jacob Elordi. His portrayal of the monster is layered, restrained, and emotionally resonant, marking a significant milestone in his career. It's a performance that feels award-worthy and showcases just how far he has come. Despite its deliberate pacing, the film never drags. It embraces a slow-burn structure that allows tension and emotion to build naturally, leading to a finale that feels both earned and emotionally satisfying. The story's scope gives it an epic quality, showing how personal obsessions ripple outward and affect everyone caught in their path. Overall, Frankenstein, 2025, feels like a modern classic in the making, a testament to a filmmaker who continues to prove his mastery of the medium. While not without flaws, it remains one of the most memorable films of the year. There's a sense that something small keeps it from absolute greatness, though it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what that is. Even so, the technical execution is strong, the visual identity striking, and the performances compelling. Once again, Del Toro demonstrates his rare ability to bring empathy and depth to cinematic monsters, reminding us that humanity often lies in the most unexpected places. That element may come directly from the source material, but the way it's handled here makes the creature feel more emotionally vulnerable than in most adaptations. I genuinely like the ending in theory, even if the film seemed to lose its footing on the way there. The final stretch struggles a bit with pacing, and there are a few issues I can't fully articulate. It's tempting to say the movie weakens in its last 30 minutes, yet there are moments in those closing scenes that still worked for me, which makes it hard to be too critical. I wish I had loved it more, but at the same time, I'm relieved I didn't enjoy it less. This feels like a mid-tier Guillermo del Toro project, still absolutely worth seeing, just not among his very best. My reaction is similar to how I felt about his take on Nightmare Alley. Visually impressive, technically accomplished, strongly acted, but longer and more stretched out than necessary. Maybe I'm being a bit tough, but Del Toro has proven time and again that he's capable of brilliance. So this feels like watching a straight A student turn in a solid B. It's still good work, just slightly below expectations. My live reaction/review for Frankenstein, 2025. Rated R? Nice. That immediately raised my expectations. I went into this without much knowledge of the Frankenstein story, so everything felt fresh and unpredictable. Wait, he's bulletproof? That's wild. And he can physically move a ship? How powerful is this creature supposed to be? At least he can't swim. Finally, a weakness. I kept questioning Victor's motivation. Why would anyone create something this dangerous? Learning more about Victor's childhood helps explain it, though. His obsession with defeating death entirely is intense, borderline unhinged. Someone offering Victor funding for his research? That's exciting, but also suspicious. There's an interesting romantic tension between Victor and his brother's girlfriend that adds another layer of complexity. The creature itself looks unsettling, purple-toned, barely human, and deeply strange. Yet at first, it seems gentle. So what changed? I couldn't help but feel sorry for the creature. Watching Victor spiral into frustration and despair instead of pride was unexpected. When Elizabeth discovers the creature, things take a dark turn fast. Seeing Victor physically attack, it was heartbreaking. And when he outright tries to destroy it, that betrayal explains the creature's rage completely. We've heard Victor's side of the story. Now it's finally time for the creature to speak. And honestly, that was one of my favorite parts. The old man is fantastic, wise, calm, and strangely comforting. The creature's desire for a companion hit hard. The loneliness is crushing. When he forgives Victor, it's clear he has a soul. He isn't just a monster. Of course, he helps free the ship. I saw that coming, but it still worked. Overall, this ended up being surprisingly strong. Gorgeous visuals, solid horror elements, memorable characters, impressive production design, and excellent performances. Del Toro's talent is undeniable. Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi are both outstanding, seriously gifted actors who deserve all the praise. I haven't seen many Frankenstein films, but I'd absolutely recommend this one. Del Toro's version may be the most visually rich and detailed take on the story yet. While many adaptations focus mainly on the monster, this film dives deep into Victor Frankenstein himself, his past, his grief, and his motivations. The movie opens with Victor being chased across the ice, eventually rescued by a naval crew. He recounts his story to the ship's captain. Victor comes from privilege, a respected surgeon for a father, an aristocratic mother who tragically died during childbirth. Her death drives Victor's lifelong fixation on conquering mortality. Years later, he encounters Heinrich Harlande, a wealthy industrialist who offers to bankroll Victor's experiments, clearly for reasons beyond pure science. Elizabeth, Heinrich's niece, is engaged to Victor's brother, adding further tension to an already complicated situation. This is a grand, ambitious film. Huge sets, striking costumes, strong performances, and a beautiful visual identity. It is slow and undeniably long, but rarely dull. Interestingly, I didn't find the creature grotesque like in many versions. Instead, he's strangely attractive, more like an oversized man marked by scars and wounds than a stitched-together abomination. Honestly, he might be the most visually appealing Frankenstein's monster yet, with one very campy exception, of course. By the end, when Victor creates life only to abandon and brutalize it, the question becomes unavoidable. Who is the real monster here? I finished Frankenstein feeling impressed by its scope, its craftsmanship, and its ambition, even if it didn't fully reach the greatness it was aiming for. Oscar Isaac delivers a commanding and intense performance as Victor Frankenstein, while Jacob Elordi is a genuine revelation as the creature, offering a layered, vulnerable portrayal filled with emotional weight. The film leans closely into the spirit of Mary Shelley's novel, giving it a welcome sense of authenticity, framed by Gothic imagery and moody, atmospheric visuals. Guillermo del Toro's fingerprints are unmistakable throughout, from the lavish production design to the somber, regret-driven emotional backbone at the heart of the story. That said, the film occasionally feels overly impressed with its own scale. With a runtime pushing close to 2.5 hours, the pacing begins to sag, particularly in the final act where some of the earlier tension dissipates. At times, it feels less like a tightly focused horror tragedy and more like an expansive directorial showcase. The story opens in the frozen Arctic, where a ship's crew rescues a gravely weakened Victor Frankenstein, only to be confronted by a terrifying figure stalking him across the ice. After the threat is seemingly neutralized, Victor recounts his past, his creation of the creature, and the deep remorse that now defines him. He warns that death will not truly end the nightmare, and when the creature returns, he must be left alone to face it. From there, the narrative shifts perspective, allowing the story to unfold through the eyes of the so-called monster. Visually, the film is striking, grand in scope, meticulously designed, and filled with impressive set pieces. Alexander Desplat's score enhances the emotional depth, adding elegance and melancholy in equal measure. While the film mostly adheres to Shelley's original framework, Del Toro makes it clear where audience sympathy should lie, portraying the creature with humanity and tragic dignity. Isaac and Elordi are both convincing and compelling in their respective roles, and Mia Goth stands out as a thoughtful counterbalance, portraying a woman who challenges Victor's moral blind spots and questions the ethics behind his obsession with science. The emotional bond between creator and creation ultimately brings the story to a poignant close, even if it never fully ignites into the masterpiece it seems poised to become. Before diving deeper, it's worth mentioning that I haven't read the novel, so this perspective isn't grounded in direct comparison to the source material. Judging the film on its own terms, however, I found the rhythm slow, sometimes uncomfortably so. There were moments when staying engaged became difficult, and I couldn't help but feel the story could have been told more concisely. Early on, before the creature's creation, much of the dialogue felt muted and less impactful than it needed to be. That said, the first act does succeed in capturing Victor's obsession with life, death, and the desire to conquer mortality. His motivations are clear and compelling. The visuals are consistently engaging, and the contrast between the living and the dead is handled with a poetic sensibility. The idea that a being born from death survives while the living are destroyed adds an ironic, almost tragic beauty to the narrative. Still, the pacing remains the film's biggest weakness. While some conversations are meaningful and well-written, others feel unnecessary and drawn out, slowing the story's momentum. Despite this, the creature itself is wonderfully realized, both visually and emotionally. Ultimately, the film's greatest strength lies less in its narrative substance and more in its thematic poetry. The story of a being rejected for his appearance, contrasted with moments of compassion, such as the blind man who accepts him without judgment, offers a powerful reflection on human cruelty, perception, and empathy. In the end, the movie is flawed but worthwhile. It contains moments of beauty, insight, and emotional resonance, alongside stretches that feel overly long and occasionally unfocused. The spiritual and philosophical undercurrents are what kept me invested more than the plot itself. As for Del Toro's broader legacy, The Shape of Water remains a standout achievement, an undeniable triumph that earned its accolades. This film doesn't quite reach that same level, but it is undeniably stunning to look at. One of the first things that stands out is just how visually breathtaking it is, easily among the most beautiful films I've seen. Even with its imperfections, it's a cinematic experience that lingers. Guillermo del Toro has always been known for his imagination and visual craftsmanship, but I honestly don't think I've ever seen one of his films look quite this breathtaking. And what's remarkable is that the beauty is only the beginning. There's far more depth beneath the surface. I haven't personally read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus from 1818, so I can't fully judge how faithful this adaptation is to the original novel. Based on my general familiarity with the lore, though, it feels closer to the source than most previous versions. While I still admire the black-and-white 1931 classic and its iconic 1935 sequel Bride of Frankenstein, it's difficult to directly compare them to a modern film made without the technical limitations of the 1930s. As much as it pains me to say it, this version surpasses every Frankenstein adaptation that came before it by a wide margin. It would be easy to describe this film as simply the Frankenstein story you already know, but that wouldn't be accurate. There are multiple layers woven into both the screenplay and the characters. Nearly everyone on screen feels thoughtfully developed, but the real standouts are Victor Frankenstein and his creation. I never expected to see such emotional and psychological complexity explored between these two figures. The depth here genuinely caught me off guard. Visually, the film is astonishing. Once you settle into its rich aesthetic, and that may take a moment, you start to appreciate just how carefully constructed it is, from the production design to the storytelling itself. Despite its lengthy runtime, the film is surprisingly well-paced, rarely feeling indulgent. It's impressive how something rooted in such familiar material can feel so fresh and inventive at the same time. Honestly, this film alone feels like a strong argument for a Netflix subscription, or even owning a copy outright. I've already watched it twice in one weekend and fully intend to revisit it again soon. Final thoughts. I haven't even touched on the cast yet, which is stacked with talent. Charles Dance continues to be a joy to watch, as he's been since Alien Superscript 3. Christoph Waltz delivers another reliably strong performance, and Mia Goth is solid as well. Though, if I'm being completely honest, she feels like the weakest link here. That said, she's still good, just slightly overshadowed by the rest. One last note, 2025 has been an incredible year for horror films. For a while, I was torn between Presence and Weapons of my top pick. Now, though, I'm confident Frankenstein sits at number 1 for me so far. Directed by Guillermo del Toro, Hellboy, the film stars Oscar Isaac, Mia Goth, Christoph Waltz, and Jacob Elordi as the creature. The story follows brilliant but obsessive scientist Victor Frankenstein, who assembles a living being from human remains, only to face the consequences of playing God. The visuals are stunning. The makeup work is exceptional. The musical score is hauntingly beautiful, and the performances are strong across the board. Jacob Elordi, in particular, stands out. His portrayal subtly reminded me of Christian Bale, who is also set to play the creature in 2020's Success the Bride. My main issue lies with the runtime. At around 150 minutes, the pacing occasionally feels sluggish, to the point where it almost plays like a 4-hour film instead of 2.5-hour one. Still, if you're a fan of Del Toro's style, this is very much his film through and through. The Danish framing at the beginning and end adds a striking, icy elegance, enhancing the film's old-world atmosphere. The creature itself is disturbingly inventive, grotesque, yet strangely sympathetic, and the blend of practical effects with visual effects is seamless. The time almost melts away, as if you're being pulled through a cinematic wormhole. There's also a sense that this story might not be over. The creature's longing for a companion hints at the possibility of a continuation, a Mrs. Monster, perhaps. Set in the late 1800s, the story opens with Captain Anderson, Lars Mikkelsen, leading a dangerous Arctic expedition toward the North Pole. His crew encounters a near madman claiming to be Victor Frankenstein, along with a terrifying being of unnatural strength. As both men recount the events that brought them there, the film unfolds as a cautionary tale about ambition, obsession, and human arrogance. There's something poetic about the right filmmaker finding the right story, and Del Toro feels uniquely suited to bring this timeless myth to life. While the film echoes earlier adaptations, particularly Kenneth Branagh's 1994 version, it takes notable creative liberties, especially concerning Victor's family and the nature of the creature. These choices give the film its own rhythm and identity. In the end, this is a bold, visually rich, and emotionally layered reimagining of a classic. Flawed in places, yes, but still a remarkable achievement. For me, it's a solid 10 out of 10, even from a grumpy old horror fan. The film opens with a deliberately restrained first act, glossing over certain pivotal moments from the novel, most notably the death of Victor's mother. This early section drags more than it should, which is hardly reassuring for a movie that stretches beyond the 2.5-hour mark. Fortunately, once the groundwork is laid, Guillermo del Toro shifts gears and unleashes his signature visual grandeur. Frankenstein's fortress-like home and laboratory emerge as jaw-dropping centerpieces, complemented by several striking visual flourishes that remind us of the director's unmatched eye for atmosphere. In terms of performances, Oscar Isaac brings an unhinged, obsessive edge to Victor Frankenstein, portraying him as a man consumed by ambition and arrogance. Jacob Elordi's interpretation of the creature is more eloquent and emotionally layered than usual, though his appearance feels almost too refined, lacking the raw menace once embodied by Robert De Niro in the 1994 adaptation. Still, the supporting cast, featuring Christoph Waltz, Charles Dance, David Bradley, and Lars Mikkelsen, adds considerable weight and gravitas to the film. By the time the credits roll, the experience feels undeniably bloated and somewhat self-indulgent. It would be unfair to say the film leaves no impression. Del Toro remains faithful to several major moments from Mary Shelley's novel, while also injecting his own stylistic flourishes, creating a hybrid that is at times effective and at others frustrating. Paired with this year's earlier Nosferatu, the film does signal a renewed interest in Gothic horror for a modern audience. From the filmmaker behind The Shape of Water and Nightmare Alley comes another exquisitely crafted fantasy centered on obsession, mythology, and monstrosity, one that showcases both Del Toro's strengths and his recurring shortcomings. While visually mesmerizing, the film often feels emotionally distant. This long-cherished passion project clearly reflects the director's deep admiration for the source material and his compassion for the creature, but admiration alone isn't enough to sustain the story. Del Toro's attention to technical detail borders on fixation, and in doing so, the screenplay is left underdeveloped. The imagery is consistently stunning, yet the narrative lacks cohesion and emotional propulsion. One can't help but wonder why so much effort was invested in building practical sets, when the final result often looks heavily digitized. The performances are solid across the board, but they don't always feel fully convincing or fully utilized. Overall, Frankenstein benefits from Del Toro's artistic sensibilities, but fails to deliver a truly engaging journey. It also falls short of the thematic depth found in James Whale's classic interpretations. While the film has moments of emotional resonance and undeniable craft, it struggles with pacing and focus. Too absorbed in its own technical ambitions, this latest effort ultimately disappoints. That said, the film does succeed in one notable area, presenting both the creator and the creation as equally tragic figures. Rather than favoring one perspective, the narrative allows the audience to sympathize with both Victor and his creation as they spiral through desire, regret, and self-destruction. This balance is partly inherited from Mary Shelley's novel, which explores timeless ideas about divinity, nature, and humanity's futile attempt to surpass its own limitations. The story raises enduring ethical questions. What happens when humans attempt to play God? What responsibilities do creators bear toward the lives they bring into existence? And who truly deserves the label of monster? Is it Victor, whose ego and despair give rise to suffering? Or is it the creature, condemned to a life he never chose, deprived of guidance, and condemned to pay for another man's madness? In this respect, both the novel and its cinematic adaptation offer compelling food for thought. Visually and technically, the film shines, and the cast is one of its greatest assets. Unfortunately, the longer the runtime stretches and the more Del Toro injects his own ideas, the more the narrative begins to unravel. The final act leans heavily into sentimentality, bordering on melodrama, with an especially overindulgent musical score. In the end, Frankenstein is neither a disaster nor a triumph. It's a competently made, occasionally powerful film that never quite comes together. Verdict: watchable, but unlikely to linger in memory for long. When Elizabeth, played by Mia Goth, finally comes face-to-face with Jacob Elordi's imposing creature, it becomes clear that Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein isn't really striving to be a definitive or faithful retelling of Mary Shelley's novel. Instead, it feels closer in spirit to a spiritual cousin of The Shape of Water, another tale centered on a misunderstood being and a woman who sees past the surface. That earlier film itself evolved from an abandoned attempt to revive Creature from the Black Lagoon, and many of those ideas echo here. The result is a story that leans heavily into a romanticized bond between human and monster rather than true horror. Unfortunately, neither creature is particularly frightening, making the film feel oddly at odds with its marketing as a Gothic horror experience. Del Toro also spends time explaining elements that older adaptations wisely left mysterious. One such example is how Victor Frankenstein, played by Oscar Isaac with an intensity that often borders on abrasive, manages to construct such an extravagant fortress laboratory capable of reanimating life. This is partially justified through the involvement of Christoph Waltz's wealthy benefactor, though his role feels more like an afterthought than a meaningful addition. The actual act of creation, arguably the heart of the story, is rushed through to arrive more quickly at the Beauty and the Beast dynamic. Once the creature begins sharing intimate moments with Elizabeth, after a brutal, almost ninja-like rampage against sailors in the icy opening, the narrative starts to feel less like a cohesive story and more like a loosely stitched montage. In truth, the material might have been better served as a limited Netflix series, allowing the plot to fully breathe instead of merely touching on its themes. This was a project that immediately caught my attention when it was announced. Guillermo del Toro has a long-standing reputation for crafting lush, visually striking films, and seeing him tackle a classic Gothic tale seemed like a natural fit. I attempted several times to catch this in theaters, though its lengthy runtime made that difficult. Ultimately, I saw it in 4K at the Gateway Film Center, which certainly enhanced the visual experience. Synopsis: Victor Frankenstein, a gifted but deeply self-absorbed scientist, succeeds in bringing a creature to life through a forbidden experiment, an achievement that ultimately seals the fate of both creator and creation. The story opens in the mid-19th century aboard a ship trapped in Arctic ice. Captain Anderson, portrayed by Lars Mikkelsen, struggles to keep his crew hopeful as they attempt to free the vessel before it's locked in place until spring. An explosion in the distance leads the captain and his men to a nearby encampment, where they discover an injured Victor. He's brought aboard, but during the night, a hooded figure attacks, humanoid in shape, yet far stronger than any man. The crew manages to subdue it and believes they've killed it by casting it beneath the ice. As Victor recovers, the ship's captain presses him for answers. Victor begins recounting his life story, starting with his childhood. As a boy, he was largely raised by his mother, played by Goth, while his father Leopold, a celebrated surgeon and baron portrayed by Charles Dance, remained distant. A tragic childbirth complication claims his mother's life, and Victor grows increasingly resentful as his father favors his younger brother, William. Consumed by grief and ambition, Victor throws himself into academia, eventually studying in Edinburgh. At a university demonstration overseen by Professor Kremp, he astonishes the audience, including the influential Harlinda, by briefly animating part of a human body using electricity. Impressed, Harlinda offers financial backing for Victor's research, though his support comes with conditions, one of which remains deliberately vague. William later arrives with his fiancée, Elizabeth. Victor is instantly drawn to her, though she is initially repelled by his arrogance and rigid worldview. Over time, a friendship forms, something not lost on Harlinda. Victor continues his experiments with help from both his brother and patron, racing against time as a profitable war nears its end and Harlinda's secrets begin to surface. The experiment ultimately succeeds. The creature lives, but its limited speech and fixation on Victor infuriate its creator. From there, the story traces the path that leads both men to the frozen north, including the creature's encounter with a blind hermit and the film's central idea, that humanity, not the monster, may be the true villain. I'll stop my plot summary there. What's worth discussing next is the legacy of the source material. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is among the most frequently adapted stories in cinema history, alongside Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That familiarity is both a strength and a challenge. Reinvention is necessary, but innovation is difficult. What works best here is Del Toro's willingness to take the core narrative framework and reshape it through his own thematic lens. Even when the film stumbles, that creative ambition deserves recognition. One of my long-standing issues with Universal's original Frankenstein films is that they feel incomplete when viewed in isolation. The first film focuses almost entirely on the creation itself and the creature's escape, while Bride of Frankenstein functions as the second half of the narrative. What this new version smartly does is merge those halves into a single, more cohesive structure. The story opens amid the frozen Arctic, where Victor recounts his past, framing the film as a dual narrative. The first major section is devoted to Victor's account, while the second allows the creature to finally tell his own story. It isn't a literal page-by-page adaptation, but clearly lands on the novel's most important thematic beats. The opening chapter explores Victor's obsession with defeating death. The loss of his mother devastates him, and he quietly places blame on his celebrated surgeon father, fueling his desire to surpass him at any cost. In an interesting deviation, Elizabeth is no longer a childhood companion or fiancée. Instead, their relationship is forbidden and unresolved, as she remains committed to Victor's brother. This change grounds Victor emotionally and makes his arrogance feel earned rather than cartoonish. Oscar Isaac brings intensity and restraint to the role, crafting a Victor who is both brilliant and deeply flawed. When the focus shifts to the creature, the film truly finds its emotional core. His stitched, uneven appearance, reminiscent of Branagh's adaptation, feels far closer to Shelley's description than the flat-headed universal design. Jacob Elordi's physical presence works in the character's favor, with the script even justifying his height through Victor's deliberate choice of elongated limbs. Elordi communicates sorrow and fear largely through posture and expression, presenting a being who is terrified of humanity, especially his creator. That underlying sadness gradually hardens into rage, and the transformation feels organic rather than forced. The supporting cast adds meaningful texture. Victor's father, Leopold, instills relentless ambition through neglect and cruelty, shaping Victor's own emotional coldness. Christoph Waltz's Harlanda recalls the manipulative energy of Dr. Pretorius, acting as both patron and pressure point, particularly when Victor's resources are threatened. Elizabeth's arc is another highlight. She begins with open disdain for Victor, only to gradually reveal her own intellectual curiosity and scientific interest, an addition that deepens her role in the story's final act. Performance-wise, the film is ultimately a two-hander between Isaac and Elordi. Their work anchors the narrative, while the rest of the cast serves to push them toward their inevitable collision. Waltz is compelling as Harlanda, Mia Goth brings layered intelligence to Elizabeth, and Felix Kammerer is solid in his supporting role. The Arctic framing device benefits from Lars Mikkelsen and his crew, while appearances by Charles Dance, David Bradley, Roman Griffin Davis, Ralph Ineson, Peter McNeil, and Bern Gorman add welcome texture without distracting from the central drama. From a technical standpoint, Guillermo del Toro's direction is visually rich and meticulously detailed. The Gothic atmosphere feels fully lived in, blending period authenticity with steampunk-inspired science fiction. The creature's design is striking, and the effects are often visceral, though there are moments where digital elements feel slightly overused. The score complements the mood beautifully, reinforcing both tragedy and awe. The film's most noticeable weakness is its length. While the story is complex, the runtime occasionally tests patience. In the end, Del Toro delivers a visually arresting and thematically thoughtful reimagining of Shelley's novel, structured around the dual perspectives of creator and creation. While the extended runtime holds it back from greatness, the film remains a strong and respectable entry in the Frankenstein canon. Isaac's portrayal of Victor captures arrogance and obsession with precision, while Elordi's creature is tragic, restrained, and deeply human. The revised relationship dynamics, faithful creature design, strong supporting roles, and immersive Gothic style combine to create a compelling, character-driven adaptation that largely succeeds. Dr. Victor Frankenstein, consumed by the dream of resurrecting the dead, ultimately succeeds in animating a sentient being assembled from fallen soldiers and criminals, powered by immense galvanic machinery. Del Toro's interpretation of Mary Shelley's classic is gorgeously photographed, filled with inventive techno-Gothic flourishes and supported by a strong ensemble. Though the story broadly follows the novel, it introduces new elements, some more successful than others. The creature's regenerative abilities, in particular, feel inconsistently defined and occasionally push the film into supernatural fantasy, undermining its grounded scientific premise. Still, the film remains an engaging take on a familiar story, elevated by exceptional lead performances. There have been countless Frankenstein films, and fatigue with the material is understandable. Yet Del Toro's distinct Gothic sensibility and commitment to atmosphere make this version stand out. Like many viewers, I was curious to see how he would approach such a well-worn tale. While many of his stylistic choices were predictable, especially visually, they are executed with enough craftsmanship and personality to justify revisiting the story once more. I had a feeling going in, and it turned out I wasn't mistaken. The performances, the storytelling, the reliance on practical effects, the detailed sets, and the restrained but effective use of CGI all come together exactly the way a Guillermo del Toro film should. Everything feels carefully placed, purposeful, and visually convincing. To put it simply, I enjoyed the film. It delivered precisely what I expected, while still offering moments of genuine scale and ambition. There's an undeniable epic quality to the production. Oscar Isaac proves once again why he's one of the most reliable actors working today, handling the role with intensity and conviction. Christoph Waltz appears briefly and in a far more restrained manner than usual, but even in a limited role, he remains solid. Mia Goth feels refreshingly different here, while Charles Dance is pitch perfect. Felix Kammerer delivers a strong performance, and David Bradley is almost unrecognizable beneath the makeup, though his unmistakable voice gives him away. Lars Mikkelsen also leaves a positive impression. Before this film, Jacob Elordi was largely unknown to me. I hadn't seen his work before and didn't come in with any expectations. By the end, he completely won me over.